All right, guys. So we delayed the second installment of the Becoming Brigitte series because after announcing that we were going to air the episode on our CandaceOwens.com website, we underwent extensive DDoS attacks all weekend. Essentially, our servers were being overwhelmed. Then yesterday evening, we received a second strongly worded letter from the Élysée Palace from Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron. This time it's a very brief letter, which we are going to show you in its entirety later on in the show. What can we say other than the Macrons sure are not behaving like a couple who have absolutely nothing to hide? So let's figure out why they are behaving the way that they are. Welcome back to our Becoming Brigitte series. So a lot of people were wondering with the first installment, the entry to this series, why are the French people allowing this to happen? How could they allow all of these things to happen? And you're probably wondering how on earth Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron have pulled this off, essentially this mass suppression of the press so that none of us were even aware of all of this weird stuff happening in their country. How is it that Emmanuel Macron, who was virtually unknown to the public a year before he came into power, managed to scuttle the campaign of François Fillon, the man who was a shoo-in essentially for the presidency? How did he do all of this? Well, for English speakers, it's a bit like the rise of Barack Obama. Sure, yes, Barack Obama was a senator and he therefore was involved in politics to some degree, but his ascension into the presidency did sort of in many ways come out of nowhere. Except Barack Obama was not married to someone who was more than 2 decades older than him. Emmanuel Macron, just to be very clear, and I will state this again and again, was just 14 years old when he appeared in a school play at his school called La Providence. Brigitte, at that time, was a teacher at the same school who ran a theater workshop, okay? She was, in fact, 39 years old at this time and allegedly married with 3 children. One of her children, Lawrence, was the same age and therefore in school with Emmanuel Macron, okay? So the story goes that she saw him perform in a play and she was just swept away, eventually unwilling to resist her feelings for the much younger prince. So much so that she eventually divorced her husband. She broke up her family because of this. Of course, this is objectively a very creepy story. So how on earth did they sell it to the French public? That's where we need to begin here. The answer, of course, as always, is through a very intense propaganda campaign that is filled with lies and severe intentional misrepresentations. As Xavier Poussard, that is the journalist that broke this incredible story, puts in his forthcoming book, he wrote this, quote, "To sell this improbable story, intense propaganda was deployed across all media, television, radio, and the internet. Books praising Brigitte and Emmanuel and glossy magazine covers saturated the public space. The aim was to subliminally instill in the minds a storytelling designed by the cream of the Parisian specialists of public image. This pulpy narrative told the story of Emmanuel Macron, a precocious and virtuoso student at Lycée La Providence in Amiens. The press compared him to Mozart, who won over his teacher Brigitte, a dynamic, beautiful, and charismatic woman," end quote. So yeah, they sold this as a story of triumph over conformity, right? This age-defying love, perhaps, as we now know, an early nod to the written works of Macron's favorite author, André Gide, who, as we mentioned in a previous episode, was a self-admitted pederast. He raped Muslim boys, and he wrote about this openly. And despite this, he would wind up, or at least his book would wind up, in Emmanuel Macron's first presidential portrait. Incredibly creepy. On the 14th of April, 2016, when Paris Match, the magazine, devoted its first cover to Brigitte, the readers were told that one day in her heart, everything secretly changes. She attends Milan Kundera's play entitled Jacques et son Matre, in which one of the 9th graders, Emmanuel Macron, is the hero. He's already got his eagle eye, they write. Oh, yes, he's already got his eagle eye, kind of honing in on Brigitte. That's what we're told. Here's, by the way, a little video of Emmanuel Macron performing when he was younger in a play. You can just take a look at this. We can let this run.
C'est bon de renaître. Elle m'entend. Ma sœur aveugle et muette. La nuit. Qu'est-ce qui fait le plus peur aux hommes? L'aboiement d'un chien, l'ombre d'un homme.
Wonderful, wonderful, irresistible for an almost 40-year-old woman who then had him join her theater workshop in the next school year. Now, we should pause here to consider how terrifying it is that the media as an entity has this kind of power to romanticize acts of sheer evil and then to gaslight and bully those who recognize it to be so. Those of us who say, no, there's something very wrong with this picture. Anyways, no less than 60 newspaper covers were dedicated to Brigitte within a period of just 26 months. Paris Match alone thus far to date has dedicated 13 covers to Brigitte. Now, I would refer to that as sort of a psychological strategy of oversaturation, right? If you give the public so much information, whether it's true or false, it becomes immediately implausible to the average person that there might be something hidden, right? Because you're like, well, there's so much information. It becomes sort of the media bystander effect. If so many people are covering the story, then the story must be covered. It's already covered. There's nothing left for us to learn. So I'm going to now tell you the official legend that was established about Brigitte Macron in these early days by the media. It is as follows. First and foremost, they told the public that the age gap between them was that he was 17, an outright lie, and that Brigitte at the time was 36, also an outright lie. Now let's go through the timeline of Brigitte's prior life, which was asserted by this same media, okay? They tell us that in 1953, on April 13th, 1953, ironically the same date that the MK Ultra program came into existence, Brigitte Trogneux, maiden name Trogneux, was born in Amiens. She was the youngest daughter of a family of confectioners who prospered in northern France. Then they tell us that after a strict Catholic education with the Sacred Heart Sisters in 1974, when she was 21 years old, she married a man named André Louis Ozier, becoming then Brigitte Ozier, married to a bank executive. Following in her husband's footsteps, Brigitte Ozier began a career as a press officer at the Chamber of Commerce in Lille. And then they went on to have 3 children. One, firstborn, Sebastian, in 1975, a son. Then they had Laurence, a daughter. That's the one that was the same age as Emmanuel Macron and attended school with him. They had her allegedly in 1977. And then came Tifon. Tifon, you will come to recognize, is really the only one of the children that speaks out and defends Brigitte Macron, which is quite interesting. They had her allegedly in 1984. And then the story goes that after becoming this press officer and working there at the Chamber of Commerce, she decided to switch to teaching at some point in the mid-1980s, first in Strasbourg as a literature teacher at the Lucie Berger Protestant College, then, of course, at La Providence, the Jesuit college back in her native Amiens, because her and Emmanuel Macron are from the same place. So in 1991, she went back there. And of course, while she was there, she fell head over heels in love with the brilliant student, Emmanuel Macron. Now, this entire story was being painted absent any pictures, right? And so as the press was selling this, they tried to get readers to imagine that Brigitte was just irresistibly sexy and hot, right? Like she was this sort of 1980s pinup doll. Just unbelievably like a Claudia Schiffer type. This was the image they were trying to paint in their head. Like she's older now, but ooh, if you had seen her when Emmanuel Macron saw her, she was like a pinup, and she was wearing short skirts. They talked about how she used to wear skirts and how all the boys were just drooling over her. All of these boys who happened to be going through puberty at the school, fantasizing about this hot Claudia Schiffer type teacher. And of course, the brilliant virtuoso Emmanuel Macron and her then began this sort of clandestine affair. Years later, in 2006, recognizing that she was hopelessly in love with Emmanuel Macron, she made a huge decision to break up her family by divorcing her husband, André Louis, the banker, and marrying her former student, Emmanuel Macron, just a year later in 2007. Okay. Again, that's the legend that was established by the media. Now, to control the public image of Brigitte, the couple brought in, well, a woman known as Mimi Marchand. She goes by Mimi for short. That's the woman I'm showing you right here on the left-hand side, walking next to Brigitte. And she is known as the Pope of celebrity press, the Popess of the celebrity press. You do not cross Mimi. I'm talking about this all week. PR firms, people that they're at the top, she will break you down if she needs to. You can see all sorts of trials she's been involved in. She has been accused of using tactics of blackmail and coercion. We'll get into that in a little bit. And her task was to essentially flood the public with these hyper-selected photos of the wannabe presidential couple looking airbrushed and fabulous. Just sell this idea that nothing weird happened in the past. And so Mimi was able to enjoy essentially near exclusivity on Brigitte's image through her photo agency, which is known as Best Image. You will find, as we get deeper in this series, you yourself are going to fall down this hole and you're going to start looking for photos and trying to verify things about Brigitte's past. And you're going to see in the corner that a lot of these photos say Best Image. Yes, that is Mimi Marchand's photo image business. It means Mimi was in control of this image. Now, as far as the conversations that were being had between Mimi and Brigitte, there was one person acting as an intermediary. And that person's name is Xavier Niel. He is a billionaire, you should know, one of the wealthiest men in France. And I should mention that he is also the son-in-law of Bernard Arnault, the CEO and the chairman of LVMH. Yes, that LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet, and Hennessy. In January of last year, Bernard Arnault overtook Elon Musk to become the richest man in the world. Okay, Bernard Arnault's children, 2 of them, were actually taught by Brigitte in school. And you should know, 2 of his children were taught by Brigitte in school. Later, Brigitte developed a close relationship with Arnault's eldest daughter, who she didn't teach, Delphine, who would go on to become Brigitte's clothing provider through, obviously, Louis Vuitton's artistic director and stylist, okay? Just to follow that, Bernard Arnault has a daughter, and she gets involved in styling and dressing Brigitte Macron, the first lady, and she does this, obviously, through Louis Vuitton and taps their artistic director to be the stylist. That artistic director's name is Nicolas Gaslighting. Now, why am I telling you about that? Who cares what Brigitte is wearing? Well, you should just know as another fun fact that this man is the main promoter of transgenderism and androgyny in the fashion world. He's huge, okay? Not only has he been, and this is directly according to Out Magazine, deliberately hiring trans models and choosing them to open for Louis Vuitton's fashion show, like when he picked a 23-year-old transgendered individual named qu'elle to open for their 2018 show in which they premiered their spring-summer collection. But Gaslighting also has taken it upon himself to launch the careers of a ton of transgender models all throughout the fashion industry, like one person named Teddy Keane-Livon, who has thanked Nicolas profusely, who at the age of 23 became a household name after being discovered by Nicolas Gaslighting. At the age of 21, he was discovered. By the age of 23, he was thanking him. And so this is just the person that's dressing Brigitte. I digress. So what? Okay. Brigitte's stylist specializes in transgenderism in the fashion world as a creative director for LVMH. Coincidence, you could say, right? Fine. Okay. The point here is also to demonstrate the kind of power that surrounds Brigitte, because when we consider how it might be plausible for a story this big to have been intentionally covered up by the mainstream media, well, it's kind of important to know who is the surrounding cast and how powerful these people could be. The other point is that Xavier Niel, going back to him, that's Bernard Arnault's son-in-law, who was the go-between between the wannabe presidential couple and Mimi Marchand, our Pope press lady. Xavier Niel and Mimi met through a shared lawyer because both of them have a bit of a checkered past, okay? Xavier, in the 1980s, helped develop a chat service that was dedicated to cyber sex, and it became incredibly lucrative for him. And then he became part owner of a chain of peep shows, and one of them was later found to be a front for a prostitution ring. And in 2004, he was arrested on charges of aggravated pimping. I should be clear here that those charges were later dismissed, but I do also here want to quote Xavier Poussard's book. He says this: a lot has been written about Xavier Niel, the father of the free box and the €2 cell phone subscription plan. Essentially, this is like, just to make it clearer for English listeners, it's almost like Verizon bundle. This is how he became extraordinarily wealthy. Today, he is a full member of the global hyperclass, connected to all the Silicon Valley big shots and propelled by Henry Kravis to the board of directors of the powerful American investment fund, KKR. However, the role of its storage service, DL Free, in hosting child pornography is still too little unknown. And Free has even been described by the Canadian Centre for Child Protective Services as the largest source of child sexual abuse images. Okay. Now, you can go down that line. You can look up what the Canadian Child Protection Project Arachnid is and why they started going after this, and that's connections to Xavier Niel, but that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm here to tell you about how he met Mimi Marchand through a shared lawyer, because she was serving time, Mimi Marchand, after being accused of various things. She had racked up a string of suspended prison sentences in the 1980s and spent 2 years behind bars awaiting trial over her involvement with her gangster boyfriend, who is identified in her biography as Hafid, even though eventually she was not convicted. And then eventually Xavier Niel gave her money to save Best Image. Then in 1998, she was handed another 3-year suspended sentence over another former boyfriend and a whole drug dealing operation. And through that, Xavier helped her out financially, of course, in 2024, when he saved her photo agency again, Best Image. And in turn, for him having saved Best Image or helped her out, I am sure that she looks after the images of him and his associates in the public, okay? So just how central was this woman, Mimi, in creating this image of Brigitte to the public, okay? This woman who is known to be a little bit of a gangster behind the scenes. Like I said, you can look into her yourself, Mimi Marchand. In fact, I think the New York Times just did a takedown piece of her and all of her involvement. Well, just over a year after Macron was inaugurated, the president of France, Mimi had this picture of herself taken in the presidential office, making a V for victory sign with her hands. Yeah, because they were indeed victorious in having fooled the public about Brigitte. That's what I would imagine that's all about. But then something really interesting happened, okay? Very interesting happened. Brigitte and Emmanuel, shortly after that photo was taken, made the decision to sort of carefully pull away from Mimi Marchand, their PR fixer woman, because she was involved in another scandal. And you guys, I'm telling you, it just seems to be a lot of oopsies around this couple. It's weird, okay? So Mimi also shares another friend with Brigitte. They have a mutual friend in a billionaire, and that is named Marc Ladry de la Charrière, okay? Marc is so close to Brigitte, to be very clear, so close to Brigitte Macron, and he enjoys being photographed out with Brigitte Macron, so close that they decided to attend the production of a show together, a show called Starmania. And you're going, wow, why do I remember Candace talking about Starmania on the last episode? Oh, because that was the show that they attended together that was produced by Thomas Joly, where Brigitte then handpicked Thomas Joly to do the Olympics. So Marc Ladry was with her, okay, at that premiere when they were like, this is the right guy to throw on these Olympics, which, the Olympic show, which had obviously transgendered individuals, we had drag queens that were strutting. There was a lot going on that offends my Christian senses, and I would call it satanic. Anyways, you're probably wondering why Mimi's mutual friend with Brigitte caused a problem for the presidential couple, in which suddenly they said, we've got to back away from Mimi. Well, Marc, that guy Marc Ladry, another billionaire, happens to have a really troubled son named Jeremy. And shortly after Mimi took that picture in the presidential office, it was revealed that Mimi did her friend Marc a solid by keeping Jeremy's name and his face out of the press, because she runs the press. Like, she's like a press gangster, so to speak. Jeremy, his son, was the former manager of a children's entertainment company who was twice convicted, once in 2008 and once in 2015. And you're never going to guess what it was for: child pornography cases. And then again, beyond this time, and recently in 2004 and 24, the mother of his children summoned police to their place in Marrakesh out of fear after she went through his computer. And they have very young children. The ages at that time were 3 and 1, I believe, after discovering even more images on his computers. Investigators collected 4,000 images of children on his computer, naked children that were being raped. For that, he has, by the way, gotten another slap on the wrist. What I was able to determine online, and again, obviously French is not my first language, is that he's been sentenced to just 8 months for that, and that sentence has been suspended, meaning it won't happen until down the line. That's the last I could find on it. I'm happy to correct that if that information is wrong. So that's 3 child pornography convictions for Mark. And Mimi helped cover up the one in 2015. And so anyways, covering up Jeremy's tracks and that conviction was a bad look for the newly presidential couple. And so they began to pull away from her. But Mimi's kind of one of these people, like we were talking about yesterday, these PR agents that you just don't cross, okay? And she didn't like that. She didn't like that people were starting to say that she was on the outs, that she was no longer allowed into Élysée Palace. Then a book was published in October of 2018 called The Book of Mimi, and it became even more clear that she was persona non grata in the presidential inner circle, and she was no longer invited to attend the Thursday meetings at the Élysée. And so what does a PR person do when they feel burned? They drop a bomb in the press. And it looks like she indeed dropped a bomb, an explosion in the press about Brigitte Macron in the magazine called Closer, okay? Brigitte had somehow been spotted at the entrance to the American hospital in Paris, reportedly for undergoing cosmetic surgery under general anesthesia. And the First Lady was furious about this publication, okay? She publicly condemned Closer magazine for her favorite invasion of privacy, okay? Understandable if you're at the hospital getting some work done. Her reaction, though, seemed like an overreaction, especially to journalist Xavier Poussard. It just struck him as odd because a year earlier, another magazine called The Express had similarly outed her for going under the knife with a doctor named Dr. Sydney Ohana, and yet she didn't care. She didn't face that doctor and the Express did not face any public condemnation. Brigitte was not mad at them. So Xavier's going, what particularly about this publication and Closer made her freak out, made her go so far as to set for the first time a precedent in which the First Lady came out and publicly condemned the press? So he began poring over that article in Closer, trying to understand, what did I miss? What did I miss? What's in here that set her off? And he found it. You see, while Closer had not named the surgeon, they didn't at all name the surgeon who worked on Brigitte, they did this sort of petty thing where they left a massive, undeniable clue as to who the surgeon was. In the magazine, they described the surgeon as a, quote, eminent and media-savvy plastic surgeon who would keenly quote Victor Hugo, his favorite expression, woman's flesh, ideal clay. Well, there was only one surgeon who had been featured in the press with that quotation just a year earlier in Paris Match, and his name was Dr. Patrick Buey. He's a plastic surgeon at the American Hospital in Paris, who in that Paris Match feature, which was entitled Operation Young Again, replied to a question that he was asked, and he said, woman's flesh, ideal clay. Now, why was this a bombshell in Closer, or rather a threat that was made, a shot that was fired, if you will, to Brigitte Macron? Because in France, Patrick Buey is known most eminently for one thing: feminization surgery. He is the king of transgendered feminization surgery, to soften the face features. If you are a man trying to become a woman, it will soften your face features with feminization surgery. And if there was any question that was remaining in anyone's minds as to whether or not he was indeed being used by Brigitte Macron, they needed to just wait until 2023, because here's a picture of them together. Yeah, years later, in 2023, Emmanuel Macron decided to award Dr. Patrick Buey with the French Legion of Honor, a high distinction in the French Republic. Imagine the Medal of Freedom in America. He's being awarded that. We're going to pause there because that is a lot of information for you to digest, information for you to unpack, and information for you to research. Again, we are at the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to this couple and the connections and the power that they have and how they were able to execute this farce in the public. What we will show you in the next episode is how the storyline begins falling apart. And we can bring up that timeline again, how this perfectly curated idea of Brigitte's background, absent any pictures, people started to go, wait a second, something's not right here. And it sort of begins with just a couple of pictures that are released of Brigitte Macron in those years when she was allegedly a pinup doll. And she didn't look anything like a pinup doll. And she wasn't wearing short skirts. She was wearing baggy suits. And no, it didn't seem like someone in which teenagers would be falling over themselves. Here she is right here. There she is in her teaching days. That's the hot pinup Claudia Schiffer-esque. And people began to go, wait a second, are we just being sold a bunch of lies? And the answer, of course, is going to be yes. But I want to first get into showing you the letter that we received yesterday from Brigitte Macron and Emmanuel Macron. But first, I am, before we read that letter in its entirety, going to throw it to one of our sponsors, Good Ranchers, who has stood by us from the very beginning. I absolutely love Good Ranchers. All right, guys. So the letter, crazy. We are really just, I don't even know what to say here. I don't know what to say. So obviously, for those of you who have not checked out the past episodes, you should. We will, here on YouTube, we will put them all together so that you can see it as a series of everything that's happened with Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte Macron. They sent us a letter, and essentially in that letter, they did not address the substance of the claim that Brigitte Macron was a woman, but began to pick apart at other things that we had said and said, this could be defamation because of this could be defamation because of that. We responded to them and basically said, look, we're not in the business of lying. I believe, Candace believes that Brigitte Macron was born a biological male. We're not doing this for funsies, obviously, okay? And we're going to give you an opportunity to answer these questions, yes or no. Very simple questions. We went over it in the first episode. Questions like, did the First Lady Brigitte Macron give birth to 3 children? Yes or no? Was she born a biological male? Who was the person in this photo? Et cetera, et cetera. And they did not answer us at all. We gave them, I think, what would amount to 10 days, more than 10 days perhaps, to respond before we launched the first installment of our series. We got no such luck. Then after the first installment, the introductory episode, last night, we received an email from their legal team here in the United States. And I kid you not, I'm just going to read it to you in its entirety because I've realized that they're trying to assert the claim that we picked and chose what we read to you. Yeah, it was a 100-page letter. We didn't have 3 hours, and none of it answered our question as to whether or not Brigitte Macron was a man. We get that you're trying to pretend that mistakes about colorization, could amount to defamation. We know your game. So let's jump into this letter that we received, and I'll explain to you what they're referencing and what we said back to them in our letter.